Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofrumento, and I'll tell you what, today's guest, I've been so excited to talk with him here today because when we first came across his work, one of the taglines that we found is, I show solopreneurs that selling doesn't have to suck. And that's something that we can all so deeply relate to in our own businesses. So let me tell you about today's guest. His name is Dan Mott. Dan is a revenue mindset coach for solopreneurs. He's the creator of the Manifest a Million Challenge. He's the co-founder of marketingops.com. And heck, on the side, he even runs a Dungeons and Dragons networking group for business nerds. Like I said in the very beginning, he shows solopreneurs that selling doesn't have to suck. What I love about Dan's methodology is he teaches the 3-step pitch-free framework. All of us are going to benefit from learning this framework from him here today so that you don't have to spam anyone ever again and you never have to worry about where to find your next customer. I'm personally really excited about this one, so I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Dan Mott. All right, Dan, so much goodness that we're going to dive into, but first things first, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Heck yeah, likewise. Obviously, I'm super excited because there's some goodness. I can't wait to get into that framework, which I teased a little bit, but before we get there, take us beyond the bio. Who the heck is Dan? How did you start doing all these cool things that you get to do today?
You bet, man. I've worked with so many people who hate selling and who have struggled to do it for so long. And I was there. I was one of them. I've been in sales my entire life, and it's the one thing I can't seem to escape. So I said, screw it. I'm no longer going to be afraid or fearful of or have to force myself into doing this thing that I hate. I'm going to create a system that's going to work with me, one that I can actually enjoy, connect with real people, and have conversations and use relationships as the tool to drive business opportunity in every capacity with everyone I work with.
Yeah, I love that overview, especially because those are the words that we'd like to put in relationship with sales. Is we want it to be conversational, we want it to be relationship based, but for a lot of us, our connotations of sales are very negative. It's, the hard pitches, it's the knocking on doors, picking up cold calls, and all of those elements of it. How did your attitude and your methodology towards sales, how did it shift along the way? Because you weren't born understanding it the way that you understand it now. So take us through that progression.
You bet. So I actually did start my career in sales, going door to door and knocking and getting slammed in my face. And I was actually stopped by the cops twice. And that was always a fun experience. So, it was going through this evolution. Every sales role I had, I never really liked. I moved out of sales into marketing. I started entry-level marketing, moved my way up to director of marketing. I started running the agency that I was working at. And then my bosses from there wanted me to start calling people. And I was like, I don't want to do that. And they were like, tough, we need you to do it. So I was like, all right, I'm putting in my 2-week notice. And that was coming up on 5 years ago now. So I even working for myself, I knew that, I don't have a choice. I have to sell. If I want to stay working for myself, if I want to stay in business, if I want to support my family, I need to figure this out. I don't have a choice anymore. But I took the hard path, right? I didn't want to listen to the advice that was being given to me. I didn't want to go buy lists, scrape lists, spam people, send thousands of messages and hope that one would come through. So I really put a lot of time and effort into coming up with a system that I truly felt comfortable with, because I knew that once I did that other people would be so attracted to it, because no one gets in business for themselves to go sell themselves. They get into business for themselves because they're passionate about the thing that they do, and they want to spend the majority of their time doing that thing, the area of expertise that they have, supporting their clients, the people that they work with. They don't want to have to go sell people on it, right? So I created a system that allows them to do just that. Spend the minimal required amount of time doing sales, talk to as few amount of people as you can, because you want those to be the best quality leads, the people who are going to get the most value from you and want to work with you and refer you and be your best clients, and have you just stay focused on the fulfillment as opposed to the selling.
Yeah, that's a really important point that you just called out. I think a lot of people, I always talk about the difference between being a practitioner versus an entrepreneur. If you are a physical therapist and all you want to do is physical therapy, you're a practitioner. Go get a job. But if you want to be an entrepreneur, you don't just get to be a personal therapist or a physical therapist. You now are also a salesman or a saleswoman by definition. You have to go get clients. You only get to be a physical therapist. You only get to do the thing if you generate sales for you to do the thing. So I think it's a really important foundational approach for us in today's session with you, Dan, is because we're all salespeople, whether we want to be or not. So I want to hear that story of, because I would imagine that as a cold door-to-door salesman, you were told, Dan, when you go to the house, do this, use this opener, here's your close, here's your calls to action. What was the first time that you were like, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to do it differently? What was the different approach that you tried at first?
So I did get sucked into, right? Like I remember when I first started working for myself, I didn't know what else to do. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna have to cold. I always gravitated toward LinkedIn, right? I was like, okay, well, I'm still going to need to message people. So I need to figure out a way. So I did start just by like mass outreaching to people, but at least from a copy perspective, right? Like the technique didn't change much, but the copy that I used was, I tried to be a lot more playful and fun with it. So like, I remember the very first message I sent out, the very first thing I did was call out the fact that like, hey, no one likes being like reached out to cold, but what if I could, and then like kind of went into my pitch from there. So at least I like tried to have some fun with it. And I did get some positive responses, but it really didn't change, right? Like I sent a lot of messages and very few people responded. So I was like, all right, well, what's the next progression? How do I continue to get better from here? And it literally took just going through hundreds of thousands of conversations. And my strategy has evolved over the past 5 years, and it will continue to evolve. The more conversations I have, the more feedback that I get, and the more that I learn throughout the process. Not only in just going through the process myself, as like I still have to sell myself and my services and my course, but like then I'm also teaching other people to do it. I'm getting their feedback. I'm seeing their experiences. So I have a lot more data to work with now, which allows me to continue to improve the process and the templates and the ideas and the frameworks that just only help it get stronger and stronger every time we use it.
Yeah, which is obviously a natural and easy segue for me here today to start transitioning into your methodology and into your framework, because pitch free, Dan, that's super sexy. It's a very nice hook that obviously all of my listeners are like, Brian, stop asking Dan questions and let him get straight into that framework. Talk to us about that methodology and the strategy that you use today and that you also teach to others.
Yeah, you bet. So the 3-step pitch free framework is what I ultimately came up with. There's a lot of moving pieces around it, but it is the core kind of fundamental part of how you move someone from stranger to client. And essentially the first part is actually having a conversation. So there's a lot of different places that a lead can come from. But say, for example, if you meet someone on LinkedIn, you meet someone at a conference, or you are on a podcast, or you are doing some sort of collaboration with someone, people are going to see you, right? So typically through your marketing or your networking engagements, you are able to kind of identify people who could be potential clients of yours. The first thing you want to do is you want to engage them as a human being. And I think our first reaction, especially in the digital world where we're kind of hidden behind our screens and our keyboards a little bit, where we can kind of say and do things that we wouldn't necessarily say in person. So the first thing is always like the mindset, right? Like, how do I have a conversation with someone that is actually going to get them to respond to me? Because it's not a conversation unless there's two people involved. So the first step of the pitch free framework is how to actually have a conversation with someone that gets them interested in wanting to have a call with you, wanting to actually speak with you on a Zoom meeting or face to face, whatever it might be. So the second step of the pitch free framework is that actual call. It's the introduction, it's the meeting, it's the face to face, either virtually or in person. But the goal of that is to not pitch yourself. It is to simply get to know them, to share your story, what you're passionate about, where you come from, and what your mission is. Because in that process, it naturally gets people excited about what you're doing. So you're organically pulling people into the process, not by saying like, here's what I do you want to work with me? It's here's what I'm excited about. And they then are asking what comes next. So once you've got their attention, you've got them excited, they want to learn more about what you do. The third step of the pitch free framework is to give them value, to offer them something of value. And this typically comes in the form of a workshop or a free consultation, some sort of free offer where they are getting a taste for what it is that you do. And you're actually giving them action items and advice that they can take home with them. So then that way they can be like, wow, that was crazy, right? Like they got all that value from you for free without any commitment. It is a no-brainer at that point for them to want to continue working with you.
Yeah, Dan, gosh, I love the overview. Clearly, it's not your first rodeo when it comes to sharing that and articulating this, but because it resonates so deeply. And it's because I think that whether we are entrepreneurs and we've done sales a lot, for me, I'm 16 years into my entrepreneurial journey. I've had to refine and define and redefine that sales process so many times along the way, but also just as consumers, anyone who's been sold to, I think they're going to hear these 3 steps and be like, yes, that is a better way to sell and it's a better way to be sold to, because you're never really going in for the kill. We hear the Grant Cardones of the world that they're like ABC, always be closing, and none of us want to be sold to. So I love the fact that you said it right there in step 1, treat them like a human. And it's something that I've long realized when I get cold pitches literally every single day. As a podcaster, I get 20 to 40 pitches from people who want to be guests on the show, who want to sell me services supporting a podcast. And I always joke around with people, if you mention the Boston Celtics or Manchester United, you'll get me to respond to you far quicker than if you mention business things. So talk to us about that conversational piece, the human to human element, because it's so at the core of what you do, both personal wise, but also career wise. How do we start treating people more like humans when it comes to initiating these conversations?
That's a great question. So yeah, the icebreaker is the most important part because that's going to be the thing that actually gets someone to respond. So you literally just need, right, like, You gave away your secret right there, right? Like, here are 2 things that if you send me in whatever form, no matter what you say, I'm going to respond. And that's what you're after, is identifying what does this person care about, right? And I think we go online and we see like, all right, what is this person's business? What do they do? Right? Like, we need to disconnect from that. We need to disconnect from their business lives and see them as human beings, not just like the buyer at this organization. So when we go and we look at what content they're posting or whatever, right, like whatever public information we can find about them, that gives us hints and clues about what their hobbies are, their interests, their passions, whether it's work related or it's personal, right? You just need something to latch onto that you can both connect about. So it's a common thread, a common theme, something that you both have the interest in because you can speak to it passionately. So it's not only the idea that you're like dropping a name or a topic that they're like, well, I want to talk about that, right? Like they can't even hold themselves back. They have to respond because they're so passionate about it. But then when you talk about it passionately too, then that just like, that puts them over the edge. There's no stopping them from wanting to respond. So it's really about that common thread, getting the conversation started, because once the conversation is started, you can move it anywhere you want. And that's really kind of like the goal of sharing your story, is because that's how you pull anyone from any conversation, wherever you are, back to your area of expertise.
Yeah, Dan, I already exposed myself here on the air. I'm going to expose you on the air as well, because it's something in your LinkedIn profile, which listeners, we're going to drop Dan's personal LinkedIn link at the end of today's episode. Obviously, you'll be able to find it in the show notes. But what I love about your LinkedIn, Dan, is you wrote at the bottom. So you've got really good sales copy and marketing copy, by the way. But at the bottom, you wrote, and or want to immediately become best friends? Mention one of these: Dungeons and Dragons, Star Wars, Harry Potter, Dune, anything fantasy, video games, board games, any kind of game, really. I love that fact because you want to. This is something that's true of all of us. Guess what, Dan? You want to be surrounded by people who share your common interests. I also want that exact same thing. So why hide those facts? And I think it's so powerful for us as entrepreneurs, as business owners, to go find those things about other people, because we all know this is something that, being human, we inherently understand about each other. So I love that. Let's progress right into step number 2, which is you talked about that introductory meeting, whether it's in person, over Zoom, however that takes shape. What does that conversation look like? Are there a set of preset questions that you turn to? Is it just natural curiosity that guides you there? What do those look like?
Yeah, definitely. So the goal is to make it feel like a completely organic, no agenda kind of conversation, right? Like when you're in conversation with someone, setting up the call, I call it the "you're cool, I'm cool" factor. Let's hang out. So like that's kind of that's the preamble to the call, right? Like, you seem interesting. I would like to get to know you better. Let's chat. So you're just going to set a open agenda, kind of like no plans, like you seem cool. I just want to get to know you better. So that is the feeling. That is the vibe that you are creating on this call, but secretly you very much have an agenda. That agenda is kind of 50-50, is to share your story, and I keep going back to this term, your founder story, because it is a tool that is designed to share your experience, your expertise, and who and what you are and what you do. So that way you're organically right, you're selling yourself without having to sell yourself here. So you're getting them into the conversation, you're sharing your story, you're equally listening in and hearing their story, getting to learn more about them and what their experiences are, right? You want to pull that out of them because you're also doing a lot of qualification in this process. You're learning more about them and their business and their goals and their passions and their challenges. So you can use this as a tool to move you forward. But what it feels like from the other side is like, oh, like Dan really cares about like what I do and wants to know more about me. Oh, I love Dan's story. It's really interesting to hear like all the things that he's gone through. But they're learning so much about you and you're learning so much about them in the process, then that way it ties you up for the end of that call to be able to position the next step in the process.
Yeah, I love that overview, especially because, Dan, hearing you talk about these things, I know that not only have you developed your own system and your own framework in how to do this the right way that I think we're all going to be on board for hearing you talk about it, but also you've had the more traditional sales training. Having been in sales for as long as you have, talk about qualification, for example. I think that that's something for a lot of us entrepreneurs when we started our own business, we never had sales training. We don't even know what qualification is or what is it that we're qualifying about this person. So I'd love to hear your traditional and not so traditional thoughts about qualification.
So because this one is more of a logistics thing, it really can stick and standardize to more of the traditional things, right? Like what you see behind this, it's really the things that happen behind the scenes don't really matter to the other person because that doesn't change the way that the conversation or the relationship feels at all. However, it is informing you and keeping you prioritized on speaking to the right people. So a lot of people that I've spoken with, and I've experienced this a number of times, that people hate niching down, right? Because they don't want to kind of like narrow their focus too much. But what happens is when you focus on a very specific set of people with very similar strategies, like they've been in business for the same amount of time, they practice the same industries, or they have the same focus. When you find a certain type of people that have the same background similarities, you are setting yourself up to build better programs that can enable them even further, right? So you're doing both yourself and them a favor by being hyper-focused because the quality of work that you can deliver to them is significantly higher because if you're doing the same thing over and over and over again for the same type of person, nothing changes except for the feedback that you're getting along the way to improve the system. But when you start to work with someone who is a little bit in a smaller company or a bigger company or in a completely different geo than the last person or a different industry, it becomes a lot harder to tie all those things together. So by sitting down and getting really focused and saying, well, here are all the things that I can look at before I get on a conversation with someone. I can look at their LinkedIn profile. I can look at their website. I can look at whatever public information is available to me. And I want to make a checklist. And I want to say, the ideal type of person that I want to work with has been in business for this long, has this type of title, works in this type of industry, right? And you get the more specific you get, the less time you're going to spend with people who are either not qualified because they're just completely in the wrong direction, or maybe they're close enough, but they're not there yet. They're not ready for your services because maybe they haven't been in business long enough and they haven't experienced those challenges yet. So the goal is to get hyper focused and clear on this is who I want to work with because this is the best type of person that I can support, that I can add the most value to, which only helps both you and them. And when you do that, you spend so much more time talking to the right people that they convert at a higher rate, and you spend significantly less time in the sales process and again, have much better, more focused work with them that gets them better results and you better results.
Yeah, which I think comes back to that point that you made really early on in our conversation today, which is the goal is actually to speak to as few people as possible or as needed in order for our businesses to grow. So I really love the fact that you keep highlighting that. And before I tee you up for step number 3, I do want to give you some public kudos here, because obviously step number 3 you've already shared with us is to give value as part of the 3-step pitch-free framework. And Dan, I remember 16 years ago when I started my first business. It was the summer after the freshman year of college for me. And I was just consuming all the content. I was listening to podcast episodes, watching YouTube videos, reading all these business books. And it just seemed like so many of those experts at the time, it was gatekeeping. They were gatekeeping all of their methodologies and frameworks. And so when we talk about giving value, there's so many, it's become a cliche in the world of entrepreneurship of, give value. We don't know what that looks like. But Dan, it's the very reason why I've been so committed to having amazing entrepreneurs like you here on this show, and why this show started was because you're not holding back. You are showing up fully through the lens of, I want to tell people very openly what my 3-step pitch-free framework looks like. So that's all my preface to tee you up for that step 3 of just showing that you're doing this in real time with us, is you're giving value. What does that step mean for you?
Yeah, so this one is really kind of the key here, right? And I truthfully, I stole this from everyone that I ever worked with, who I was like, wow, they did a really good job. Like, I didn't even need I wasn't openly in the market for what they had, but when I talked to them and I realized how they could help me and how I was being held back by the process, because they spent so much time with me and because they lent me their expertise and their knowledge that helped me see, oh, this is something that I need to work on. This is something that's holding me back, or this is something that can propel me so much further than the path that I'm currently on. I was so blown away by those experiences that I stole it. I was like, this works. Like, I need to implement this into my system. And I quickly started doing that. And I started to experiment with different ways to how do you add value. And the goal really for this 3rd step, I call it the free offer call, and it can take so many different shapes or forms, but it's really to softly onboard them as a client. So you want to give them an experience of, right, like, because when you sell yourself, right, if you're hard selling yourself or you're going through the system the way I am, you're talking passionately about like what you do and how you help people. You're more talking about like the frameworks that you have and what you do and what the transformation at the end of the day can be. But that doesn't really paint the picture of what the experience for me as your customer is going to be like when I actually start to work with you. Right. So when you can clearly paint that picture for someone, it goes, okay, now I clearly see what this experience is going to be like. And that helps me paint the picture from where I am today to where I want to go. And working with you is the path forward. So you're making a free offer and you are spending 45 minutes to an hour with them, sitting them down, going deep into their work, right? Not just teaching them a lesson, but actually getting hands-on in their business, really pulling out the information and giving them actionable steps that they can take. I will literally give people a template that they can go use on their own. So you want to give them something of value that expands beyond just the call itself, something they can take home and continue to work on, right? They might dwell on it that night and be like, crap, I'm really thinking about this. But that's exactly what you want. You want them to think of you well beyond that call, because now you're stuck in their head like, Dan pointed out all these things that I need help with. And this is great. Now I know exactly what I need to do, but I don't know how to start on each of those steps. So the next logical step is, well, Dan's already got a system that helped me get this far. And he already explained to me exactly how we're going to move through those next steps. So it's a logical next step for me to want to work with him. So you're really kind of like soft onboarding them into becoming a client and painting the picture and giving them the experience of what it's going to be like working with you.
Yeah, Dan, I'll tell you what, I've obviously consumed a lot of content in my life. I've had a lot of conversations with entrepreneurs. I've never heard someone articulate it in that way, of you're already viewing it as soft onboarding them as a client. I love that mindset that you bring in that step. And I think it's so powerful. It's something that I really resonate with, because when I started back in 2012, I started a marketing and SEO agency. Dan, I had no idea how to sell. I had started a soccer blog before that, did really well with that. I didn't know how to get a client though. And so what my business partner and I were doing at the time is we were like, let's just show. A lot of our clients were much older. They had no idea what SEO was. So we were like, let's show them SEO. Let's whip our laptops out and in real time actually show them. And we started getting clients that way. So we found some tool that would custom create an SEO action plan for them based on their website. It would just straight up say, Dan, they didn't need us at that point. It would straight up say, you need to refine your title tags on these pages. You need to focus on your meta descriptions. We just gave it away and people started wanting to work with us more. So I absolutely love that. But my job here as podcast host is to always think about the naysayers, the people who are going to say, well, Dan, but what about this? And my gut reaction when I think about the buts of today's episode is, but where do I find these people to talk to? This sounds like a really great framework and strategy that I want to start using, but how am I going to know who to do this with? What's your answer in that perspective?
You bet. So leads really can come from anywhere. There are so many different lead sources. When I started out, and still today is my favorite place, right? Like choose one platform, go do one thing, and really kind of put all of your focus in there. For me, that's LinkedIn. I love being on LinkedIn. I have so many friends there. I have so many people that I collaborate with. I have found basically all of my clients, my employees and contractors and investors and friends, right? Like it's not just about clients. This is a relationship building tool. This works across the board for every single relationship, every single opportunity that you want to find. And how being on LinkedIn for me is the best way to do it. So I'll give you the specific strategy on LinkedIn for what I do. It does require you to be creating content. I suggest minimum 3 posts per week. And when you're posting, to make sure that you're regularly actually engaging your network. And in the process, you will actually generate more warm leads than you'll ever have time to actually work. So the things that you want to do is you want to go and see who is engaging on your content, who's commenting on your content. Right? Go talk to those people. Go to their profile first and make sure that they're qualified, and then start a conversation with them in the DMs and move them through this 3-step pitch free framework. Profile views are really great ones as well. So you can start to go, this does require, the free version gives you like 5, but if you have the paid version, you can see every person that's ever viewed your profile. It's really great for lurkers because they don't comment on your posts, they don't engage, they don't DM you. But when you see that they pop up, it's a great way to start a conversation. And the third place is, so it is profile views, it is comments on your content, and it's connection requests. The people who are already sending you connection requests, whether they are blank or they have written something in it. Obviously, you can ignore the people that are going to be cold pitching you, but you can look at anyone's profile. You can go ahead and qualify them, make sure that they are a good person that you actually want to talk to, and then start the conversation from there. In a lot of these cases, the icebreaker is actually built into it because they're the ones who kind of soft raised their hands and said like, hey, like I checked out your profile. I wanted to learn more about you, right? Like they're not saying this out loud, but that's what they're telling you by viewing your profile. Or I commented on your post and I was specifically interested about this thing. I'm sending this connection request for a reason. They are raising their hands saying that they want to get to know you in some form, shape, or capacity further. Take that as the initiative to say, okay, cool, let me reach back out to them and keep this conversation going. Don't let it just die on the vine from there. So I do actually have a full guide on this process. It is a free guide that I give away. So Brian, we can definitely share that. But it walks you step by step through this entire process, as well as gives you templates for each of those 3 scenarios that you can copy and paste. There are ways to improve on them, but they are the best way to get started with 0 effort and without the stress of being like, okay, I'm here. I know who I need to talk to, but crap, I still don't know what to say to this person.
Yeah, listeners, you already know we're going to drop that link right on down in the show notes section, but we're also going to talk about links in just a few minutes from now. But before we get there, Dan, I think there's 2 things that are very readily apparent about you. One, you love what you do, and I love seeing the passion and the excitement. Really, it is joy. Actually, I'm going to add to that. It's joy that I see in you when you talk about these things. And then secondly, I think that you really mean it. You've used the word friends a few times here today, and I think you genuinely love building those friendships, whether it's within the context of life or business. You genuinely view them all as friends, which speaks to, it's right there in your bio. I love it. You run a Dungeons and Dragons networking group for business nerds. Talk to us about that friend component, because you keep talking about relationships as well, and you view it as that longer term investment because it also just makes your life better. Talk to us about where that originates and all these different efforts that you make in that domain.
Yeah, so I think, I got out of I always hated sales because it felt like a business transaction, right? And the more I spent time in roles or capacities where I could actually get to know someone, and when I could teach them something that like helped them, and you could see the transformation, you could see kind of like like I've been struggling with this forever, and I finally overcome that. And it's something that's just like I'm so used to doing. Like that's such an impactful feeling, right? Right, like it's really about the relationships. Like you hear what's the phrase? It's not what you know, it's who you know. Opportunity comes out of everywhere. So, right, like even if this person is not a good potential client, that's fine. They might know many more people than who will be good clients for you, right? They might know someone who is going to be a good partner for you. They might know someone who's going to invest in your business. They might know the potential is limitless. So when you have these deep relationships with people who know and trust you and like you, they want to support you, they want to see you succeed, they're going to go out of their way. It's more than just like a transaction of like, I'm going to give you money, give me result, right? It is, I genuinely care about you and I want to see you succeed. So I'm going to go out of my way to do things that are going to help you. And that's where you start to see referrals, and you see partnerships, and you see collaborations, and you see so much that comes out of it. And at the end of the day, that's why the relationship component is so important, is because it is the compounding effect that just really skyrockets your business. You can build a relationship one at a time, but all of those relationships, if you build them strong enough, start to have a ripple effect throughout those other networks. Right on LinkedIn, you see kind of like first connections, second connections, third connections. Those are kind of like, you don't really care about them as much in the context of LinkedIn, but when you actually build that into your personal circles, when you do have that level of confidence and rapport with people, they're much more willing to bring you into other circles. And when you have that warm introduction, everything becomes significantly easier.
Yeah, Dan, I love hearing you talk about these things because it shares so much about your inner perspective. And I'm going to very publicly toot your horn here because I think that what's so powerful about you, Dan, is that you actually practice what you preach. And so I will tell you totally transparently that we've, on our team side, behind the scenes at the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast, we've appreciated and really admired the way that you show up. For example, it's the little things. Like I always send out personal reminder emails before our production days to guests. You replied to it. And it's even things like on your guest questionnaire, you dropped a line. Like one of the things we always ask listeners, this is transparency for you behind the scenes. We always ask our guests, is there anything else you'd like Brian to know ahead of your interview? And Dan wrote verbatim, love what you're building. Keep it up. Looking forward to our conversation, with a smiley face. It's little touches like that everyone on our team, from when we first reached out to have you on the show, everyone was just like, Dan's the man. Dan's so nice. Like we love the way this guy works. So yeah, huge kudos to you. It's also why listeners, if you feel like this episode has flown by, it feels like that for me as well, which is why we're going to invite Dan back for an Action Saturday episode, which we'll be sharing with him afterwards. You listeners know more than he does about Action Saturday, so we're excited to have him back on the show if he takes us up on that. But Dan, I just think all these things, the proof is in the pudding. So I really respect and admire, and I'm so appreciative of the way that you show up. And time truly did fly by, which is why my last question of the episode is fun for me because I have no idea which direction you'll take it in. That's your takeaway. What's that one takeaway that you hope every listener walks away from this? We talked about so many important things, all the steps of your pitch-free framework, as well as the important stuff about viewing relationships and building relationships as an entrepreneur, as a business owner. With all of that in mind and all your other experiences, what's the one takeaway you hope everyone walks away from today's session with?
Have fun. Not just in the sales process, but in everything that you do. Because from my personal experience of dragging myself through the mud and trying to figure out systems that work, trying to make systems work that didn't work for me, that didn't align with who I was as a person, continuously held me back. But when I found that I put my focus and emphasis on doing the things that I loved and I cared about, and I actually enjoyed the process of doing, I became so much better at doing those. It became so much easier to learn. It became so much easier to collect feedback and improve the process. But anytime I wanted to do something that I was kind of felt like I was forcing myself through, or it didn't feel right, I was dragging my feet, I was always holding myself back. So if you just focus on having fun, enjoying the process, you will go so much further than you can ever hope or imagine.
Yes, very wise advice from you and really important for all of us to embrace. Again, so much of today's episode, we're all about when we do these things, life gets better, business gets better. So I love your attitude towards all of these, Dan. We've both teased your website and your resources and your LinkedIn quite a bit. So drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here to learn more about your 3-step pitch-free framework, as well as your LinkedIn sales process, all these great things that you're putting into the world?
Yeah, it's no surprise. I spend most of my time on LinkedIn. I'm not actually on any other social platform. I'm exclusively on LinkedIn. So come say hi to me, drop a note. Your icebreaker is already built in. I saw you on the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. That is a great way for us to start a conversation. I'd love to hear, if you have any feedback or thoughts on what I was doing, but all of the stuff all of the free resources and advice and things that I have in there, you can learn more about on my profile. It links out to my website and everything like that. What I would recommend is definitely check out, I do have a free guide in my featured section. It's called Socially Awkward. That is the guide I was talking about that takes you through how to actually have conversations in the DMs on LinkedIn with people and in a way that doesn't feel socially awkward. So templates, step-by-step process that'll walk you through how to start a conversation with anyone on LinkedIn.
Yes, I love that. Listeners, you already know the drill. We're making it as easy as possible for you to find the link to Dan's personal LinkedIn. If you want a masterclass in optimizing your LinkedIn, go check out Dan's LinkedIn. I see so many entrepreneurs' LinkedIns. Dan, I have to put you at the top of the pile. The way that you've structured it, your copy on there, how personal it is. I feel like I know you just from it. And yes, that featured section where all of you listeners can find that free guide, it's all right there. It's so easy to get your hands on it, as well as his Manifest a Million challenge. All that good stuff is right on Dan's LinkedIn. So check the show notes for that link. Otherwise, Dan, on behalf of myself, my team, and everyone who's tuning in around the world, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me. Always happy to talk about this stuff. Great questions, and can't wait to hear what comes next.